Hello, welcome to my 1 month update on the Spyderco Subvert. The Spyderco Subvert is a collaboration piece between Spyderco Knives USA and custom knife maker Natty Amore of Black Snow Knives. So this is the productionalized version of Natty's custom called the Sabotage. So the Subvert's overall length is going to be 235 millimeters or 9¼ inches. The blade is 105 millimeters or 4.14 inches. And the edge, the cutting edge, according to Spyderco, is also 105 millimeters, but using a flexible measure, I found that it was actually 124 millimeters or 4.8 inches. Closed, this knife is 130 millimeters or 5.1 inches. So it's a very good full-size knife. If you're used to something like the Spyderco Military X124s, things of that nature, this thing's going to be right up your alley in terms of edge length and reach, things like that. The one thing that is very noteworthy is that this knife does have one major difference, which is the girth. Using calipers to measure this guy out, it is 19.3 inches or 19.3 millimeters versus which is going to translate to American at 0.761 inches. So it's a very chubby knife. Speaking of chubby knives, so this is the Hinder XM 18 3.5 Fatty. This is 16.6 millimeters, not including the pivots and stuff, just the frame material to the scale here. That comes in at 0.654 inches. So all the numbers, like blah 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 numbers, what does that actually mean to someone? The best way to illustrate that is if I put all these knives side to side, and this is going to be a paramilitary or a para 3 and a Delica. So putting all these knives on the edge of the bench here and then moving the camera over, this is the most telling way where I can show you what I mean by saying this is a girthful knife. So going from the Spyderco to the para 3, which is going to be akin to like a paramilitary 2, Mannix, that kind of family, it is an absolute juggernaut. And comparing the Delica to the Subvert, it's just a little leaf. Going the other way, keeping it in big boy land, you can see that the Fatty is not that fat compared to the Subvert, and then the military as well, just going down the little gradient of size there. The Subvert is a very girthful knife. One more thing I want to do before we switch context. Everyone has a Mora, so it's throwing a Mora in there for comparison. So this is the saving grace, really. Let's get that over a little bit. Sorry for that. So basically the Subvert is going to give you the same girth and the full hand filling kind of hand feel that you would get from a fixed blade knife. So while it is a very fat knife at 19.3 millimeters, you do have that full hand feeling of a fixed blade. So that's the saving grace. Like there's a bit of a trade-off compared to other knives in this kind of overall length, and you do get something in return, but it is in the pocket. So if you're looking at this review and basically out front you just want to like, is the knife too big? Is it too fat? Yes. Yes, it is. It is a very large knife. It is a very thick knife. You will feel it in the pocket. I've been carrying this in winter where it's been about -20 centigrade most of the winter, so I'm wearing a bit looser clothes, a bit baggier, and I didn't feel it in that way. But if this was summertime and you're wearing something a little bit tighter, a little bit more fit, you will feel this guy in the pocket, absolutely. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about buying this knife. For me, the trade-off, the benefit of that is that it's still a worthwhile investment. I am keeping this knife in my collection because I absolutely love this knife. So yeah, we're going to talk a bit more about the other aspects of this knife. So am I keeping it like full on, like just the end to the front of the review? Yes, I am keeping this knife. It's in my review, and it's just sometimes you want to have a pretty little nimble thing like a Porsche. Sometimes you want to just be ridiculous and have a Hummer. This is the Hummer of the knife world. It's just ridiculous, overbuilt, and amazing because of that. In terms of use, what have I been using it for this month? As I mentioned previously, it was ridiculously cold here, so I didn't get much outdoor time. No home improvement, no yard work, no renovations, no hiking, trekking, anything like that. So I wasn't really cutting into many hard materials, so I don't have too many hard use cases or like a good like solid hour of like whittling on this guy because I just didn't have a chance to do so. But what I can say is that I did do a bunch of I did do a lot of cardboard cutting. We're a family of 4, so and we have a Costco membership, so you know how much cardboard that makes. So I did do a lot of cardboard teardown, things like that, and I also used this knife for meal prep. So fruits, veggies, and proteins, cutting all that stuff up with this knife. So I'd wash the knife before working on food materials and afterwards as well, and then just dry it on a towel. So if you listen, you can hear the bearings are just bone dry, but the knife is still drop shut smooth. Once you get past the ball bearing, the knife still does drop shut smooth, and it's just smooth operation through and through, despite not oiling it, not doing anything, just like running it for a month and seeing what happens. So in terms of that, like, I absolutely love the knife. Like, it just, again, admittedly light duty, but it took everything I did and it ran with it. For terms of slicing and cutting materials for broccoli and apple, things that are a little bit thicker, the grind on this guy actually did perform very nicely. I found like for other knives, I found like they're a bit wedgy, and the grind just like when you're cutting into an apple just kind of like gets halfway and then you end up splitting the apple. This guy didn't do it. This guy was very slicey, and it worked its way through all of that kind of material, no problem. Like cutting up chicken, proteins, stuff like that. There's no problem at all with this. It does lend itself more to like slicing and like chopping cuts. It doesn't really do the chef cut very well because of the recurve in the belly. You're only really contacting that much on the board at any time. So in terms of that kind of chopping, it doesn't do much, but all the other kinds of like ways you would process food, it did very well. Processing things like cardboard and other kind of material, what does this do? So I actually really like the blade shape for that. So this point and then the curve on this guy, I found I could pierce very nicely and start the cut, and it would just kind of start the cut very nicely, and I could carry through like just like a zipper. And it just comes to like how the tip is very sturdy, very robust, but just it's hard to show a 3D shape in these reviews, but I felt that like once I get it into the material, I can start a cut, carry cut, and it's no problem whatsoever. I didn't always have to start an edge. I can start a cut anywhere by poking the box. The other thing is that, again, it's a larger knife, so I found I had a lot of reach on the knife, and I found that the material kind of wanted to hang in this nice little recurve here. So when I'm cutting through something nice and long, it would just kind of like stay in that little bit of the knife. And I found that was quite pleasant. Like, I didn't end up running out of blade at any point in time doing longer cuts. So that was very nice and pleasant. In terms of sharpening, maintenance, all that stuff, again, it was admittedly lighter duty than my other reviews in other months. And using the Spyderco Sharp Maker with the fine rods, just honing this every couple of days, kept this knife slicey, no problems. No chips, no rollings, anything like that, because, again, this didn't really see wood or cement bags. Nothing hard ever touched this knife. So just being completely out there, like, I was lazy. Anyway, so getting on to the other things about this knife. So that's what I did with it. That's what I saw about it. Now it's like, what do I and other people like and don't like about this knife? So there's a couple of forum mates in my city that had a chance to pick up this knife before I got to it. They both passed, mostly because of the girth. It's a very girthful knife, and as we talked about before, and I feel for me, I'm okay with that, and I enjoy changing things up. And for me, it's fine as a collection piece and a user, and I'm very happy with the knife. But if you're kind of on the fence, you just have to like, be very honest with yourself. Like, will you end up using the knife? And if it's very big in the pocket, if you're in like a hotter state in the south, will it make you sweat? Like, I don't know. I don't live in a hot area, but just try and consider those things. And people in my group, they all passed on this knife because they felt it was too big and they just wouldn't carry it. And it's too much money to tie up into a collection only piece. This knife costs $300 US. So in terms of like my local forum mates, that's what they didn't like about this knife. Everything else they seemed to like about it. The action on it's fantastic. Fit finish, it's all great. In my use, the break-in on this knife, it did have 3 bouts of lock stick. The last one was like about a day and a half. And what I mean by lock stick is this knife's currently going through lock stick. It's just like there's that little bit of stick when it's open all the way to get it to disengage the blade. It sticks there. This blade was so bad that I'd actually have to grab it, pull back on the blade to relieve the pressure on the lock bar so I could open the knife up. I didn't do any sort of maintenance, assuming that I'm a guy that doesn't know anything about knives, that I don't know about like the little Sharpie tricks or anything else. Just working with this knife, it wore in absolutely beautifully. There is absolutely no stick on this knife now, with no sort of modifications or attempt at changing the knife. So in that terms, I absolutely love it, and it broke in fantastically. It's very smooth, silky, and I'm satisfied with it in that term. Other things to talk about for the knife, like what I don't like, what other people don't like. This is my major nitpick about this knife, is they have thought about everything with this knife. It's beautifully contoured G10 scales on like nice milled and radiused liners, and every millimeter of this knife has been thought out, and it's just like, it's absolutely divine, except they didn't put a detent ramp in there. So what I mean by that is there's the little ball bearing for the detent ball, and then that gets in the way. So if you overcome the lock, and then it's quite a proud detent ball, and once you get past the ball, the knife is very smooth, drop shutty action. I wish they would have put a ramp in there. So this knife does have one, and basically when you get past the lock bar, it's super smooth on the close. That seems like something of an omission that, like, while I can kind of rationalize and see why they made other kind of design decisions, I don't see why they opted out on putting a detent ramp on that. It just would have made the performance go from like great to like extremely good. So I'm just very sad that there wasn't a detent ball. I'm tempted to like get a little file, a diamond file, and modify that myself down the road. But that's my personal nitpick that I didn't like about this knife. Everything else I liked about it. Going towards like back to what the community thinks about this knife, steel pocket clip. A lot of people didn't like the steel pocket clip because they feel for a $300 US knife it should have like a titanium pocket clip. The thing is that the people that buy titanium pocket clips and they like that kind of thing, you're never really going to make them happy anyway. So I feel that Spyderco read the market on this guy, and they went with the spring steel because it's a $5 replacement part. If I bend this up on a seatbelt or break it in any sort of way because I'm using it as a user, I can go get another pocket clip and it's no problem. So I feel that they read the market and that it works out well. The other complaint is that it doesn't really match other pinouts from other Spyderco knives from the past. So that's the Hungarian. Does it match that guy? That's even off from the Hungarian. So it is a very unique pinout, and I think that's because that the arm here is also a curved thing. So I don't think you could actually just grab a lunch clip and throw it on this guy. So there is no current aftermarket that I've seen clips for this guy, but they are likely coming, and you just can't take your existing Spyderco clips. They're not compatible. So those are the things that people don't like. If you're okay with the steel clip and you're okay, and that's fine, then it's not a concern. But for me, it works. The other community complaint is the S30V steel on this guy. I have not had problems with S30V steel from Spyderco in the past. I know how to sharpen it, I can maintain it, I know what to expect from it. So in terms of that, I'm okay with it, and it's also to keep the base price down. This is a collaboration piece, so there's royalties going to Spyderco and Natty for this knife. So I feel like if they would have crept it up to like M4 or something more luxurious on this knife, it would have just crept the base price up to like, currently it's $300 US. It might have put it out of that, maybe I'll get it, because there's already a lot to consider when you're looking at a knife this big. Going to an M4 and creeping the price by, I don't know, let's say 50 bucks. That might have scared a few potential customers away. So I think that just going through the S30V for me is fine on this guy. And I think just that Spyderco weighing the market in and seeing, and they made a call, and for me it's okay. I bought the knife, I like the knife, I love the knife. So those are the main things I've seen from the community. And the last thing that the community really didn't like about this is the orange. I absolutely love the orange. I've dropped this knife in the snow 2 times, and it was very easy to find it after I dropped the knife. So the orange, the fix for that is right dye. You can Google search on this guy for right dye Spyderco Subvert. I've seen a pure black one and one that came out kind of burgundy, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And then there's one guy, he did, I think, a little camo Cerakote kind of deal on his knife, including the blade. And that's not my style, but there are options if you're not a big fan of the orange on this. The last nitpick on this knife is I was just appreciating how everything on this knife is so rounded and smooth one evening. Just like there's no transitions between the titanium and the G10 on this guy. And I ran my thumb through here pressing down quite firmly, and I ended up opening my thumb up because the blade is touchable inside there. That's a me issue. Just don't do that. Learn from my mistakes. So that's a problem with the user there. So those are all like, and that you can see I'm really digging into the weeds to find issues with this knife. It is expensive. You do get what you pay for. It is like fantastic fit and finish on this knife, and I'm totally pleased with it. I keep saying the last. Going back to the first review, why did I get this knife in the first place? It was to replace my Spyderco Military as my winter knife. I absolutely love this knife for using it with gloves on because of that very generous cutout. So it makes it that I can use the spider hole for opening with gloves, and I can actually one-hand close it with gloves on. The Subvert is very stylistically, very stylish and well designed and mirrored in all ways, but it's also, there are no relief cuts made to get to the lock bar. So it is nicely radiused here, and you can get in there, and it's nice and pleasant to use when you have a naked hand. But if you're wearing any sort of gloves, I found that this knife is fairly inoperable, and that's also one of the things that limited my outdoor use of this guy when it's -20. I didn't want to have to keep taking my gloves off to like close the knife. When the knife was dropped in the snow, the very large back opening here made it very easy to bang the snow out and get it back up and running. So in terms of that, like, the knife is fantastic, and I liked it in all those regards. The last thing I'm going to do is tear it down and just like check out like what kind of grime is in here. So if you look at the pivot on this, so the pivot on the is actually two sides. I think it's a T8 on the interior, and there's a T10 on the exterior. So you can use two different size Torx screwdrivers here, and it's T6s all the way around, par for course with Spyderco. So that one I found was a little bit different, but that's okay. So that took a little bit to start, and it looks like there is some sort of thread locker on this. Some sort of white thread locker. It's not Loctite, but some white thread locker on that pivot. And then take out that. Sorry for the fiddly bit, but hopefully you got what you want out of the review otherwise if you're at this point. Okay, that's interesting. I'll talk to you about that later. Okay, a little bit of tension on that, and okay, my stop pin fell out, and there, she's apart. So let's look at the knife. So this is a very interesting design. So I said like, oh, that's neat. Immediately what I noticed is that there are extra pins in the G10 here. I have not seen that on a knife before. I have no idea what that's for. Maybe it's for holding it when it's on the fixture and they just ended up using it as a filler piece. But that's interesting. And then the scale on this guy is very nicely made. As I was saying, like, they radius, like all the little bits that could contact your skin have been radiused nicely. So it's just little design considerations like that. Like anywhere where it wasn't flush with the G10 and you could actually touch the titanium, they radiused it, and I felt that was very nice. And then the track on that guy, it's just a steel insert on that, and it's quite nice. All right, so let's take this out. So that's about a month of using the knife and washing it and just letting it dry on a towel. So that's why the knife is sounding the way it sounds when it's closing. It needs a little bit of TLC on that. Get the last bearing out. There it is. Okay. So I'm just going to use a rem oil wipe. Again, the detent ball. So that's the crud. So it's actually like it's not that bad. It cleaned out pretty well, just like washing the knife with water and soap between all the food prep. The knife did quite well, taking all the grime off the lock bar. I don't know, it might be, I think it's just grease, but it might be a carbidized lock interface. It is different. I think they might have carbidized it. So I think what they did is they heat treated the end of this guy to be a little bit tougher titanium, and that might also be why there's no steel lock bar insert. Talked about that a little bit on the first video, and I don't have a problem with it not having a steel lock bar insert. I think Eric Lesser, the Spyderco man, he talked about it as well, and he said like when you get to a certain thickness in the materials, you don't need those inserts, and the material themselves are fine. So, all right, yep. It's quite nice inside. I'm just looking at anything else that we can see, and yeah, so this is what I was talking about. It looks like those little filler pins. It just kind of like fills up the little voids from the knife. So that's interesting how they did that, and I don't know why. It's just interesting that it was done. Just going to get the crud off our stop pin. Put the stop pin back in. Bearings are still very smooth despite going through all the water and crud. So I've also switched from, someone said that I shouldn't really be using gun oil on knives, so I got this stuff called KPL, and it is absolutely the same as rem oil. I have not noticed any sort of difference in performance, but I'm still using it because I have it now, so I haven't noticed any difference, but most of my knives, again, are slip joints and things like that that don't care. So, okay, so I lubed up the pivot there, put on one of those, drop the blade on. Okay, and then we can put on a little, you shouldn't really need to lube bearings, they should be okay to run dry, but that little gritty sound I had wasn't very nice, so I'm just trying to get rid of that. So a little bit there. Alright, and then, come on you. Again, apologies for the fiddly bit, but so I also thought that this was a dual bearing system. So by that I mean like some knives are starting to do what they call dual bearing, where the bearings are actually offset. This one is just a single row, which is fine. It's not what I was expecting based on what I was reading, but that's fine. And then clean off the back of that. So get the crud off. All right. So that. It's all back in. It's all lubed. All right, need our T8 or T6 again. So none of the screws had Loctite. The pivot had a little bit of white crud on there. I don't think that was mold. It was probably just some other kind of thread sealer that they switched to. It was very easy to get off, so yay to Spyderco. There was a bit of controversy like 2 years ago where Spyderco was red Loctiting all their knives completely shut, and you had to apply heat and torque and percussive maintenance to get that thing to open, and they've done away with that, so kudos to Spyderco to listen to their customer base and get rid of that stuff. Yep, got a little bit of oil on here. Alright, so that's all done, and now we're going to try and get this with those little pins. So it's very easy to take this guy apart, put him back together, clean it, maintenance. It seems like after a month, there's like not very much crud in there. I don't want a cross thread. That's avoiding using nature's Loctite. There we go. All right, that's where that is. And then put the pivot on. So just be careful when the pivot's loose that when you're closing the knife you don't slam it into the scales or the inserts there. And now we're just going to try and get it centered and alright, so that's interesting. For this knife, I cranked the pivot down all the way. Like it's, right now the pivot is hand tight. And the knife is perfectly centered, smooth, and there is no blade play. So that to me is a fantastic thing. Like the fit and finish on these guys, like the tolerances to get everything that tight where you torque this guy down all the way, everything goes to 0 and it's smooth. That's fantastic. So I'm very pleased with that. So yeah, that's the end of my 1 month review, overview of the Spyderco Subvert. For me, this is a permanent piece. It's going to be rotated in and out of use. I don't know that I'm going to retire it to the box for the collection. It's just, it really is a joy to use. I'm wondering if I'm going to change my mind in summertime when it's like 35 degrees out and I'm sweating. But yeah, right now my opinion of this knife is that I absolutely love it. It did all of my light duty tasks no problem. It's actually a kind of fun little fidget toy. It's super smooth and I absolutely enjoyed using it. So hopefully you found this useful. If not, let me know what you didn't like in the comments, where I can improve, and I'll try and get more information. If you have any other questions, comments, and concerns, let me know and I'll try and get back to you. Thanks so much for your time and have a good day.